Hello, welcome. It's Mr. Matthews, and we're going to have a 5-minute context video on Macbeth. So this is sort of a new series that I'm going to be producing for my students. I'm going to try and cover the main texts that we study at my school, starting with Macbeth. And it's just going to be a short video to cover some of the key contextual factors regarding Macbeth, which should hopefully help with your revision. Trying a new thing with the videos where I'm going to go for a shorter format, just to try and make your revision a bit easier and quicker for when you're short of time. And these videos be really useful before sort of mock exams or your actual exams at the end of the year. So we are going to start with the theme of looking at the monarchy. Okay, so to start with, the monarchy had recently changed to a male ruler at the time the play was written. It was King James I, and it had previously been Queen Elizabeth. And that might also explain some of the sort of, some might argue, sexist ideology that is present within the play. Lady Macbeth is obviously female and is presented rather negatively. And we've also got the witches, who also happen to be female. King James was direct descendant of the real Banquo, and perhaps this explains the character's relatively positive and noble portrayal and the prophecy that his ancestors will rule. And it was important for Shakespeare to appeal to the monarchy, as they had direct influence over the survival of the theatre and could use their power to punish any form of criticism that may be present within the play. So a couple of quotations we can look at. O nation miserable, with an untold tyrant and bloody sceptre, all hail Macbeth, hail to you, Thane of Cawdor, all hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter. Some key terminology: the great chain of being, the monarchy, nobility, Jacobean and Elizabethan, and key themes: power, deception, and gender. Moving on to the natural order. So another theme that is very present within the play is the idea of the natural order. And we often see things happening that break the natural order, the main one being Macbeth killing his king, which would have been considered breaking what we call the great chain of being. That is God's plan. And with that comes severe consequences for nature and the rest of society. So Jacobean society believed that the weather was directly controlled by God. And the weather is often used to symbolize disorder or a break in the great chain of being. We can flick over to our quotations. When shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, and rain? And we've got a clear indication there that the witches have some form of power or control over the weather. And often you associate this negative weather with indeed negative events, or indeed as a result of consequences from negative things happening, such as King Duncan being slain. In fact, shortly after he's slain, I believe they talk about it being a very, or just before he's slain, it being a very bad night with lots of strange noises from animals. Prophetic fallacy is tied in with the supernatural activities and occurrences. Again, terminology we need to learn that relates to this contextual information. The great chain of being, definitely something you should look up and research. I briefly touched upon it here. Prophetic fallacy, the supernatural, and witchcraft. And key themes, we've got nature, religion, order, and the supernatural. Moving on to witchcraft. So fear of witchcraft permeated Jacobean society, and indeed society before that time, Elizabethan society. Lots and lots of women were murdered as a result of being accused of being witches. King James I was a firm believer in witchcraft, and I believe he wrote some literature on the topic. He was quite obsessed with the concept of witchcraft. And it's believed witches would carry out the wishes and work of Satan. Women with deformities or ugliness could have also been considered witches. So it's a very judgmental society, and if you didn't quite look normal or had deformities, some people believe that was the work of God, or a punishment, if you like, for maybe something you've done in previous life. And it was also associated perhaps with evil deeds you'd committed, the idea being that if you weren't a pleasant person, you were punished with how you looked. We've also got a few quotations we can look at. So, come, you spirits that tend on mortal faults and unsex me here, Lady Macbeth. And what are these so withered and so wild in their attire that look not like the inhabitants of the earth and yet are on it? Some terminology we can look at: prophetic fallacy, supernatural, witchcraft, religion, gender, and Jacobean. And themes: gender, witchcraft, religion, and the supernatural. Moving on to patriarchy. So patriarchy. Women are portrayed negatively throughout this play, perhaps a reflection of Shakespeare's desire to appeal to the new male king. So a lot of this could be seen as his way to appeal to King James I, which is why Lady Macbeth, a lot of people consider her to be more evil than Macbeth, which is sort of a bit strange because it is Macbeth ultimately that does commit the evil acts, and he certainly is the more sinister and evil of the two by the end of the play. But a lot of people argue that it's Lady Macbeth that sets him on that path. And she's constantly trying to rid herself of her femininity. So you can look at this two ways. You can look at it as a criticism of females, or actually a criticism of patriarchy. Lady Macbeth, perhaps if women were treated more equally, wouldn't have such a desire to crave the things that seem to come so easy for the men in the play. So it's a really interesting contextual topic to think about and look at. The play explores the effects of patriarchal society and the potentially devastating effects it can have on women, exemplified in Lady Macbeth's struggle for power and influence. And Macbeth's masculinity is constantly called into question by his wife, a consequence of which is his descent into madness and murder. So we're looking at both sides of the coin there. A few quotations you might want to look at. Certainly want to try and remember for your exam. Come, you spirits of ten or more thoughts, unsex me here. Come to my women's breasts and take my milk for gall. And are you a man? Terminology: patriarchy, masculinity, femininity, and gender. And themes: gender, patriarchy, and power. One point, sorry, I missed off, is the play explores the conflict between man and wife. Macbeth is torn between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his king. And moving to the supernatural. So last thing we're going to look at quickly in this video, the theme of supernatural is prevalent throughout the play. The play was written before major scientific breakthroughs of the modern era, and as such, much emphasis is put on spiritual and supernatural ideology. Ghosts were recognised by the Elizabethans in three basic varieties: the vision, or purely subjective ghost; the authentic ghost, who has died without opportunity of repentance; and the false ghost, which is capable of many types of manifestations. Obviously, that's a reference to Banquo and his appearance. We've got a few quotations. So, come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts. Is this a dagger which I see before me? Fair is foul and foul is fair. Just touching on the dagger which I see before me. So there's a good argument in this play of looking at whether things are supernatural or whether they are driven by the madness that both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth encounter. A good example of that is the dagger. Is that an apparition that has been created by the witches or some otherworldly being like the devil? Or is it a manifestation of Macbeth's own guilt? And is it caused by his own madness, if you like? So it's quite, the play does bring up some interesting questions as to what is actually supernatural and what is actually created by the characters' own minds. Some terminology we can think about: supernatural, witchcraft, pathetic fallacy, deception, and nature. And some themes: witchcraft, nature, religion, the supernatural, and power. Just as a final slide, we've got all of those key points on one slide here. So if you do want to pause and look through those in more detail and depth or for your revision, there they are for you. And one final thing, we've got some posters that I've created on my TES store. So if you just search English resources for secondary, there's a Facebook link down the bottom there. There are links to my TES store, and these are completely free to download, these posters. And they cover the main things that you need to know for several quotations. So you've got context, some keywords and vocabulary, key themes, and the characters that they relate to. It can be quite a useful revision technique, especially when trying to think about how the context relates to the quotation, which is probably the hardest skill to think about. So we've always got to try and make sure that that context links to what we're analysing or what we're saying about the text. So that's the video done, and there'll be another one shortly. We'll be looking at Inspector Calls. We'll be doing one on A Christmas Carol as well. And then in the future, there may be some others on text that I don't teach my students, but you may be studying in your school. Thank you for watching.